The Happy Prince. A little swallow flew over the city. It was autumn, and it quickly had to move south, where it's always warm in winter. On its route, the swallow saw a golden statue of a prince, with shiny blue eyes of sapphire. On the sword of the prince was a red ruby. The little swallow settled in at the feet of the statue to rest. Suddenly, the bird felt drops on its head. They were coming from the eyes of the prince. Tears were streaming down his face. "Who are you?" asked the swallow. "I am the Happy Prince." "Why are you crying?" asked the swallow. The prince answered, "Once upon a time, I lived in a castle. It was surrounded by high walls. I never wondered what was going on behind these walls. Everything in the castle was so beautiful that I never cared for the world outside. Everybody called me the Happy Prince. Now I am standing as a statue above the town and see every day all the misery of the town. Even though my heart is made of lead now, I can't help but cry." The prince told the swallow that he had seen a worried mother. Her son had a fever, and even though she worked as hard as she could, she didn't have enough money to buy healthy food. The prince asked the bird to bring the mother the ruby from his sword. "I can't do that," said the swallow. "I have to move to the warm south. I won't survive the cold winter." "Can't you stay just one night?" asked the prince. The swallow agreed. "Thank you so much, little swallow," said the prince. When the swallow saw the sick boy, it was happy it obliged to the prince's wish. The next morning, the swallow said its goodbyes to the prince. "I have to leave. It's getting colder and colder. I can't stay any longer." "Oh, little friend," sighed the prince, and told the bird about a young writer who was working hard on a play in a cold little attic room. The writer was very hungry too. "Can't you stay a little longer?" "All right, just one more night then," the swallow agreed. "Take one of my eyes and bring it to the writer. He can sell the sapphire and buy food and wood. Please do as I ask from you," the prince insisted. The swallow took an eye and brought it to the little attic room. The young writer did not know what was happening to him. He was so lucky. "Now I really have to say goodbye," said the swallow. Again, the prince asked him to stay, this time to help a little girl. She dropped her silver sticks in the gutter. She needed those to make money. If she returned empty-handed, she would be in big trouble at home. "Take my other eye and bring it to her." "If I have to take your other eye, you'll be blind," the swallow cried. The prince insisted, and the swallow brought the other eye to the girl. The swallow then returned to the prince. "You are now blind," it said, "and that is why I shall stay with you." The next few days, the swallow told the prince of all the sorrow he saw in town. He told the prince of how rich the rich were and how poor the poor were. The prince said, "Swallow, take all the gold leaf of my body and give it to the poor." The swallow did not want to leave the prince, even though the days grew colder and colder. The bird had grown to love the prince very much. Then the day arrived that the swallow, at the prince's feet, fell into a deep, deep sleep. The prince understood that the bird was dying, and it broke his lead heart. The next day, the mayor of the town walked past the statue of the happy prince. "That statue looks horrendous. It's time to replace it." God asked one of his angels to go to the town and take the most precious thing it could find back to heaven. The angel returned with the swallow and the lead heart. "You have chosen well," said God. "The swallow and prince will live happily ever after in my golden town and paradise." The Yellow Dragon. Once upon a time, there was a boy who lived on a farm with his father Yin. The boy was called Hu. Hu was a quiet boy who liked to think a lot about everything. One day, Wu was sitting by the river. In the reflection of the water, the boy saw a man, dressed in a yellow cloak, riding a white horse. The man had 4 servants with him, one of whom was holding a parasol over the man to protect him from the sun. Wu got startled when the man suddenly was standing before him. "Son of Yin," spoke the yellow horseman, "may we rest at your house for a while?" Wu got up and bowed. "Noble lord, I would be pleased to invite you into my home." The boy's father Yin, who worked on the land, saw his son coming from a distance with the yellow horseman and followed by the 4 servants. He greeted his guests and prepared a delicious dinner. They were all seated at the table and were making pleasant conversation. Wu didn't speak a word. He was listening closely to the conversation and was observing the strange visitors. After dinner, the stranger got up and said, "Farmer Yin, I want to thank you for your hospitality." Wu walked the visitors outside. He noticed that the servant was holding the parasol upside down when passing through the garden gate. The yellow horseman parted ways by saying, "The day after tomorrow I will return." The boy answered, "You are always very welcome, noble lord." "How did this stranger know my name when I have never met him before?" thought Yin to himself. Wu was thinking the same. "Father, I noticed that the feet of the stranger and his servants were not touching the ground. Neither were the hoofs of the horses. Also, the horses didn't have hair, but scales. I also saw," the boy continued, "that the strangers disappeared into the clouds above the mountains." The farmer said, "I don't know what to make of this. Let's ask grandmother, for she is very wise." Grandmother listened carefully to Yin and Wu. She started speaking. "The horse is a dragon horse. The noble man is the yellow dragon, the spirit of storms. His servants are the 4 winds. It means a great storm is coming." Above the mountains, dark clouds were already forming. Like ink, the clouds were spreading over the country. In the morning, a violent storm erupted. The storm was so fierce, no one had ever experienced anything like it. The river rose up and covered the whole country with water. But the farm and land of Yin remained dry. Wu bravely spoke to himself. "I think the upside-down parasol and the promise of the yellow dragon to return again means something. We don't have to fear. Nothing will happen to us." That night, the storm calmed down, and the next morning the sun was shining. Wu went outside and sat in front of the garden gate to wait for the yellow dragon's return. "I promised to return, but I am only here to give you something," spoke the yellow dragon. He took a scale from his horse and gave it to Wu. The yellow dragon then disappeared in a flash, along with his horse and servants. When Wu went to show his grandmother what he got, she said, "Put it away in a safe place. It will bring you luck. The emperor shall even ask you for it." The emperor heard that the storm had ruined many houses, except for the one house that was totally unharmed. Yin and Wu were invited to the palace. They told the emperor the whole story and showed the box in which they kept the scale. When they opened the box, the scale shone a bright light which lit up the whole palace and garden. "This is extraordinary," said the emperor. "I think the yellow dragon gave you magical powers. I want to invite you to work for me as a magician." And indeed, Wu was creating amazing miracles. He healed sick people and brought the emperor great luck. The emperor was so happy with Wu that he built him a beautiful house. Of course, also Yin and the grandmother were allowed to live there. It goes to show, always be kind and hospitable to strangers. The Snow Queen. Once upon a time, there was an evil troll who made a very nasty mirror. In this mirror, you could only see all ugly and bad things. Even beautiful things looked very ugly in this mirror. One day, the troll took his mirror high up into the sky, but there it broke into countless pieces, which spread all over the world. Anyone who accidentally got a splinter in his eye could only see the bad things. If you got a shard of mirror in your heart turned into ice. How terrible! But the evil troll loved it. At this time, a boy and a girl lived in a big city. They lived in 2 houses opposite each other and played together every day. They especially loved looking at the beautiful rose bushes together. Kai and Gerda also loved listening to their grandmother's stories. One day, Kai's grandmother told them about the Snow Queen. She flies between all the snowflakes and makes everything freeze beautifully. The children listened breathlessly to the story. One day, Kai and Gerda were sitting outside when Kai suddenly felt something pierce his eye and heart. They don't know it, but these are the splinters from the magic mirror. From that moment on, Kai doesn't like anything anymore and is mean to everyone. He destroys the roses and says that snowflakes are prettier than flowers. Then he takes his sledge to the big square in town. Here he sees a beautiful big white sled. He ties his little sled to it and disappears out of town. Kai soon regretted his decision. It got colder and colder, and soon he could not see his hand in front of his face because of the dense snow. But every time he tried to free his little sled, the person sitting on the big sled nodded at Kai and he stayed put. After a long time, they suddenly stopped. "Come and sit warmly next to me, boy," said a woman's voice. And when Kai came closer, he saw that this was the Snow Queen. He sat down next to her and she gave him a kiss on the forehead. It was colder than anything Kai had ever felt, but immediately he felt the cold no longer. He had also immediately forgotten Gerda, his grandmother, and his life in the city. Meanwhile, Gerda was terribly sad. Where had Kai gone? Nobody could tell her. Gerda cried every day for months, until spring came and she decided to look for Kai. First she went to the river, but here she did not find Kai. Then she came to an old lady with a beautiful flower garden. The woman wanted to keep Gerda and bewitched her, but after a while Gerda managed to escape. Meanwhile, it was autumn again. Oh, how long Kai had been gone! Sometime later, when it was already winter, Gerda met a crow. He told her that he might have seen Kai in the castle. He knew a tame crow in the palace who could help her get in. Gerda sneaks into the bedroom of the prince and princess, and for a moment she thinks she has found Kai again. But then the prince turns his head and she sees that it is not her friend at all. The prince and princess wake up and Gerda tells her story. They take pity on her and give her beautiful clothes and a small carriage with which she can continue her search. For a long time, Gerda rode around the world in her carriage. One day, she's attacked by a robber woman and her little daughter. The daughter decides she wants to take Gerda home, and she does. In the robber's den, there are a couple of pigeons. One of them says, "I have seen little Kai. He is with the Snow Queen." "I know where the Snow Queen lives," said the reindeer that is also in the den. The robber girl wants to help Gerda and gives her the reindeer. "You two go to Lapland and rescue Kai." Gerda and the reindeer have to travel a long way. On the way, they see the wondrous northern lights in the sky. At one point, they come to a small house. Here lives a Lapland woman who is willing to help Gerda. She writes a message on a stick and sends it to a Finnish woman. They arrive there after a long time. The Finnish woman can do magic, but says that Gerda doesn't need anything extra to save Kai. Then she tells them where they can find the snow palace of the Snow Queen. Meanwhile, Kai is trapped in the castle of the Snow Queen. Only if he can make the world eternity out of large blocks of ice will he be free. But no matter how hard he tries, he never succeeds. Then, suddenly, he sees Gerda running towards him. He doesn't recognize her, but she flies around his neck and starts crying. Her warm tears make his frozen heart thaw and the shard of glass disappear. Then Kai starts to cry too, and the shard of washes out of his eye. Together, they quickly put the ice cubes away and go home. It is a long way home, and on the way they get help from everyone who had helped Gerda before. Eventually, Gerda and Kai arrive back in town together. When they walk in the door of the house, they notice that they have become grown-ups, but in their hearts they are still the same two little children. The Queen Bee. Once upon a time, there were two princes on an adventure. On the way, they were so dissolute that they did not even return home. The younger one, Simpleton, went to find his brothers. When he found them, they ridiculed him, saying that he was surely too stupid to find the right way. But they went on together anyway and came to an anthill. The two older brothers wanted to break the anthill and then laugh at the frightened ants. Simpleton said, "Leave them alone. I can't bear it when you disturb them." As they went on, they came to a lake full of ducks. The two older brothers wanted to catch the ducks and roast them. Simpleton said, "Leave the ducks alone. I will not tolerate your killing them." At last they came to a bee's nest filled with honey. The two older brothers wanted to smother the bees with fire. Then they could eat the honey themselves. Simpleton said, "Leave them alone. I will not allow you to burn them." Then the three brothers came to a castle. There were stone horses in the stables. There was no one else to be seen. They went looking in all the halls. Finally, they came to a door with heavy padlocks and a hatch that could look through. Inside, they saw an old man. They called out to him, but he did not hear them. When they called for the third time, he got up and came out. He did not say a word, but conducted them to a handsomely spread table. When they had eaten and drunk, he showed them where the bedrooms were. The next morning, he woke up the eldest and took him to a large stone with 3 tasks, by which the castle could be delivered. The first task was to find all the 1,000 pearls of the princess. These were hidden all over the forest. If even one was missing before sunset, the one who had searched would become a stone himself. The eldest searched all day, but only found 100 by sunset, and he was turned into a stone. The next day, the second brother tried. He found 200, but that was not enough either, and he too became a stone. Then it was Simpleton's turn. It was so difficult to find the pearls in the forest. He sat down on a big stone and cried big tears of discouragement. As he sat there, the queen ants passed by with 5,000 ants. The little animals quickly went to work for him and found all the pearls. They were happy to help him because he had saved their anthill. The second task was to fetch the key to the princess's bedroom from the lake. At the lake, the duck swam right up to him and retrieved the key from the depths. They were happy too to do something in return, for after all, Simpleton had saved their lives. The third task was the most difficult. The youngest and sweetest princess had to be chosen from 3 sleeping princesses. They all looked exactly alike. The only difference was that they had all eaten a different sweet before going to sleep. The oldest had a bit of sugar, the middle one syrup, and the youngest honey. The queen bee arrived. She too was happy to help Simpleton. After all, he had saved the hive from the fire. She tasted the lips of all 3 princesses and stayed on the mouth of the princess who had eaten honey. That's how the prince recognized the real one. The spell was broken. Everyone was freed from their sleep, and those who had been turned to stone became alive again. And Simpleton married the youngest and sweetest princess and even became the king after her father's death. And his brothers? They married the oldest sisters. Father Frost. Once upon a time, there was a husband and a wife who had a lovely daughter. Her name was Natasha. Not long after Natasha's mother passed away, her father remarried. Her new stepmother already had 2 daughters. Natasha was delighted to not only get a new mother, but also 2 sisters. Unfortunately, the girl soon discovered that her stepmother and her daughters were not nice at all. They let her do all the hard work and didn't do anything themselves. Her father, of course, noticed this as well, but he could not go against the wishes of his new wife. Natasha was miserable, but she didn't let it show. She always tried to make everyone happy. On an icy, cold day, with meters of snow outside and icicles hanging from the roof, the stepmother told her husband, "It is time to find a husband for Natasha. Tomorrow you will go out with the sled and take her with you." These words made Natasha very happy, for she wasn't happy at home and would love to marry a kind man. The next morning, Natasha put on her most beautiful clothes and went down. She took with her a little purse with her most precious belongings. She looked so beautiful and sweet. The stepmother and sisters were jealous of her, even though they had better clothes and jewelry. Then the stepmother told her husband, "Listen carefully. You must bring Natasha to the big hill in the forest. There you must leave her next to the big pine tree. Her groom will fetch her there. I want her to marry Father Frost." Oh, this evil plan frightened her husband and Natasha so, but they set off, and after a while they arrived at the big pine tree. It started snowing harder and harder while Natasha sat down beneath the tree. Her father said his goodbyes, crying, and went home. Natasha was getting colder and colder while she sat in the outstretched winter forest by herself. Suddenly, she heard a noise. It was getting closer and closer. It seemed someone was jumping from tree to tree. It was the frost that was coming closer. Quickly, Natasha heard the same sound right above her from the top of the pine tree. Instantly, it got even colder. Then a voice spoke. "Sweet girl, are you warm enough?" Natasha could hardly speak because she was so cold, but whispered, "Yes, Father Frost." The frost moved down the tree and asked the girl the question again. And again the girl kindly replied. Then the frost jumped out of the tree and landed on the ground in front of Natasha. He was gorgeous to look at. He had a beautiful cloak full of snowflakes and a scepter made of ice. He looked at the almost frozen girl and gently touched her with his scepter. Immediately, Natasha warmed up. Her clothes changed into the most beautiful clothes she had ever seen, and her little purse with her belongings changed into the most brilliant gems. The frost looked at Natasha with content and then disappeared. Natasha's father couldn't believe his eyes when he saw his daughter sitting safe and sound beneath the pine tree the next morning. The brilliant gems and the beautiful clothing was a nice surprise too. He took his daughter home and thought his wife would regret her decision, but instead she got even more jealous. She decided to send her daughters to the pine tree too. But her daughters weren't so sweet and nice as Natasha. When Father Frost came to check on them, they were nasty and mean. So he didn't reward them with the gems and clothes, but left them there to freeze. When their mother discovered this the next day, she was overcome with grief. But after some time passed, she realized this was her lesson for being cruel and greedy. After that, Natasha's life became much better. She met a nice man whom she was to marry, and they lived happily ever after. Sandman. Nobody in the whole world knows as many stories as the Sandman. You too will probably have heard many stories about him. He comes to all the sweet little children when they are asleep and makes sure that they have the most wonderful adventures in their dreams. He does this by turning his magic umbrella above your head. But if you have been naughty, Sandman turns his other umbrella around. This one has nothing on it, and you don't dream all night. It feels strange when you wake up in the morning. Every day, Sandman also goes to see a little boy. The little boy is called Hjalmar. Every day, the Sandman tells a different story to Hjalmar. On the first day, it was a Monday, the Sandman transforms Hjalmar's bedroom into a beautiful garden with the most beautiful trees and plants. While Hjalmar is enjoying all this, a beep comes from his desk drawer. There is his notebook, but all the letters are crooked. The Sandman teaches the letters to stand up straight. But when Hjalmar wakes up the next morning, they are unfortunately just as crooked as before. On Tuesday evening, the Sandman lifts Hjalmar into the large painting hanging on the wall. He listens to the birds singing, looks at the castles and waves to the princesses. It's as if he has landed in a fairy tale. Hjalmar wakes up in the morning, feeling satisfied. On the third night, it is raining very hard outside. When the Sandman opens the windows, the water is up to the windowsill. So he takes Hjalmar with him on a big boat. They sail across the rough sea, and Hjalmar is amazed. At one point, a stork lands on the boat. "Can I come along for a ride? My wings are so tired," says the animal. He's put with the ducks, geese and chickens and starts telling stories about Africa. The other animals don't understand him and laugh at him. Hjalmar feels sorry for him and releases the stork. He then wakes up in his own bed and thinks back to the beautiful things he has seen. On Thursday night, Hjalmar has a very special adventure planned by the Sandman. He gets to go to attend the wedding of 2 little mice. The Sandman shrinks Hjalmar so he fits into the little mouse hole. Here, Hjalmar experiences the most beautiful wedding he has ever been to. For dessert, there's a pea with the names of the bride and groom. Hjalmar has never seen anything so special. The following night, the Sandman tells the story of how grown-ups who have done something wrong often ask him if he can give them nicer dreams. They would like to pay for this, but the Sandman is not for sale. Afterwards, Hjalmar is taken to a wedding once again by the Sandman. This time, his sister's 2 dolls are getting married. Hjalmar has seen this before, but it's still a nice wedding to attend. On Saturdays, Hjalmar looks forward to the visit of the Sandman, but today the Sandman has no time for a story. He tells us that the whole world needs cleaning because tomorrow is Sunday. Most of the work is done by cleaning all the stars. Then the portrait of Hjalmar's great-grandfather interferes with the visit. He thinks that the Sandman shouldn't tell his great-grandson nonsense. Stars can't be polished, can they? Hjalmar wakes up a bit confused. On the 7th night, the Sandman has thought of something special for Hjalmar. "I want to show you my brother," he says. He is also called the Sandman, but he only knows 2 stories. One is the most beautiful story in the world, and the other is the most horrible story there is. The Sandman lifts up Hjalmar and points to his brother. People also call him Death, but he's not as scary as he is sometimes described. Hjalmar looks and sees that Death is wearing a beautiful velvet cape and is riding a horse. Death wants to see everyone's report cards. If your report is good, you can get on the horse and hear the wonderful story. If your report is bad, you have to ride in the back and listen to the horrible story. Hjalmar thinks for a moment and then says, "I'm not afraid of death." "You don't have to be afraid, dear boy. Just make sure you have a good report card," answers the Sandman. The Golden Goose. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, a family with 3 children lived by the edge of the woods. The youngest child was called Simpleton because the family thought he was very dumb. One day, the father asked the eldest son to go into the forest and chop some wood. His mother gave him cookies and a bottle of wine to bring along. On his way, the boy met a gnome. "What do you say, boy? Will you give me some of those cookies?" asked the gnome. "And maybe a drop of wine?" "Are you crazy?" the boy answered. "I'm going to eat and drink that all by myself. Get away!" Shortly after, the eldest son started chopping wood until his arms started to hurt badly. He had to stop working and couldn't bring the wood home. The eldest son had returned home without wood, So the father sent his middle son out to do the job. He also got cookies and a bottle of wine from his mother. From a distance, the son already saw the gnome. "Good day," said the gnome. "Can I have a bit of your cookie? Maybe with a sip of wine?" "Absolutely not," said the boy. "Then I will have less to eat and drink." "That won't happen." The boy walked away. Suddenly, his legs started cramping badly and he couldn't continue. He struggled to get home and didn't bring any wood. Now the family didn't have any wood left to make a fire and cook food. So Simpleton asked his father, "Shall I go out and chop some wood?" The father thought that Simpleton wouldn't be able to do it, but the youngest son kept insisting and his father let him go. His mother gave Simpleton some old dry cookies and a small bottle of old beer. "Good day," the gnome greeted Simpleton. "Can you give me something to eat and maybe a little bit to drink? I'm so hungry and thirsty." "I only have some old cookies and a small bottle of beer," answered Simpleton. "But if you don't mind, we can eat and drink it together." The cookies tasted good, and the beer did too. "Because you have such a kind heart, and you were willing to share your food and drink with me, I shall give you luck," said the gnome. "Chop down that old tree, and between the roots you will find luck." The gnome said his goodbyes and disappeared. Simpleton chopped down the tree, and between the roots he found a goose with gold feathers. He knew he couldn't bring the goose home because his parents would take it from him. So he walked to an inn to spend the night there and to think about what he should do with the goose. The innkeeper had 3 daughters. They were eager to pluck a gold feather from the goose. When the first daughter put her fingers on a feather, her hand got stuck to the goose. The 2 other daughters wanted to try as well, and they also got stuck. The next day, Simpleton wanted to leave, but saw the 3 daughters stuck to the goose. Simpleton realized the inn wasn't safe, so he quickly left with the goose. He didn't care about the 3 daughters who were stuck to it. On their way, they met lots of people who all wanted to take a gold feather. All of them got stuck to each other and the goose. And so, a long line of people was created who were all stuck to each other. At some point, Simpleton reached the city. In the city was a palace with a king who had a daughter, who was always sad. When the princess saw the parade of stuck people, she bursted out in laughter. The king had stated that he would give the person who could make his daughter happy again a reward. He had promised that the person would marry his daughter. Simpleton was eager to marry the girl whom he had fallen deeply in love with. But Simpleton wasn't a prince, and that made the king very unhappy. So the king said, "Simpleton, you are not a prince. That's why I have to ask you to bring someone who can drink all the wine in the wine cellar in one go and eat my entire stock of bread." Simpleton quickly thought of the gnome and hurried into the woods. He saw an old man sitting there. "I'm so hungry and thirsty," said the old man. "I already drank 1 barrel of wine, but it feels like I've only had 1 sip." Simpleton asked the man to come to the palace with him. The man drank all the wine in the wine cellar and ate all the bread. But the king really didn't want Simpleton to marry his daughter. "Come back with a ship that can sail on the water and drive over land," he said, which seemed to him impossible. Then the old man changed into the gnome and said, "I drank all the wine for you, and I ate all the bread. Now I shall give you that ship. I do this because you have a kind heart." The ship appeared, and the king had to agree to the marriage. The old man who made withered trees blossom. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, by the river lived 2 old men. One lived upstream and the other downstream. That's why they were called upstream and downstream. The big difference between the two neighbors was that upstream was a selfish, nasty man, and downstream, friendly and generous. One day, both men put a fish trap in the river. The first thing the next morning, impatient upstream went to check the trap, but there were only twigs in his trap. Immediately, he wanted to know if his neighbor had the same bad luck, but to his surprise, the trap of downstream was full of fish. Quickly, upstream changed traps with his neighbor. When downstream went to check his trap, he saw the strange catch. But he didn't mind, because now he didn't have to go and chop wood. When he tried to chop a big willow root into smaller chunks, to his surprise, it just fell apart. What was even stranger was that a little dog jumped out of it. Downstream and his wife took good care of the dog. Even though they had little food, they always gave half to the dog. The dog soon became big and strong. One morning, the dog said with a human voice, "Father, come join me in the forest today. Tie a basket on my back and we can go." Downstream was dumbfounded, but he listened to the dog and they left together. The old man got tired quickly. The dog saw this and said, "You have always taken such good care of me. Put the things you are holding into my basket, and you also climb in. I can carry you." The old man resisted for a moment, but soon obliged. On their way, the dog and downstream shared the food he had brought. A little while later, the dog stood still. "Father, here you should dig." And the man started to dig. To his surprise, he found a pot full of gold. Over the moon, he brought it home to his wife. Shortly after, their neighbor upstream found out about their luck. He asked if he could borrow their dog, and kind as downstream was, he agreed. But upstream was very mean to the dog. He sat on the dog's back without asking and gave it no food. So instead of leading him to a pot of gold, the dog led upstream to a pot of trash. Upstream got so angry that he killed the dog. Downstream and his wife were heartbroken and made the sweet dog a beautiful grave. They put a willow branch on the grave so that they would always be able to find it. But the branch didn't remain a branch. Within a year, it had grown into a beautiful big tree. Downstream enjoyed sitting underneath the tree. On a warm autumn day, he suddenly heard the voice of his dog from within the tree. "Cut down this tree and turn it into a mortar for the rice." The old man immediately obeyed. He would have a nice keepsake to remember his dog by. When the mortar was done, he gave it to his wife. She put a little rice in it, and to her surprise, the amount of the rice doubled. It turned into so much rice that it was streaming down onto the ground. At that moment, the wife of upstream knocked on the door. She saw the rice and wanted to try out the magic mortar. She took the mortar home and put rice in it. But instead of doubling the amount of rice, it started to get less and less. This made upstream so angry that he chopped the mortar into pieces and burned it. When downstream came to collect his mortar, he was shocked to hear what his neighbors had done with his keepsake. He asked if they had kept the ashes and took those home. As he was walking home, a gust of wind swept some of the ashes into the garden. And everywhere where the ashes hit the trees started blooming. "I have to show this to the king," he thought. The king was known for his love of the blossoms of the cherry blossom trees. He would surely love this. In the royal garden, Downstream ran into the king. "I am the old man who lets trees blossom," he said. The king was eager to see it for himself. Downstream threw some ashes onto the trees, and indeed they started blooming. The king thought it was so beautiful that he rewarded Downstream with beautiful clothing. When Upstream heard about this, he became jealous again. He took some of the ashes and brought it to the queen. "I am the man who lets trees bloom," he said. "In exchange for beautiful clothes, I will make the entire garden blossom." He threw the ashes into the trees, but nothing happened. What did happen was that a small part of the ashes blew into the eye of the queen, who started crying in pain. Immediately, 2 big guards arrested the nasty old man and threw him in jail, where he would stay for the rest of his life. Toinette and the Elves. It was the evening before Christmas Eve. Toinette stood at the well in the forest to get water for her family. "This is the perfect moment to make a wish," she thought. "It is said that you have to say a certain rhyme 3 times. But the words of the rhyme Toinette didn't know. How great would it be if I was beautiful, rich, and a good person?" Toinette knew that she wasn't easy. She was often in a bad mood and not very kind to her brothers and sisters. Suddenly, she heard a little voice. It seemed close, but she didn't see anything. Quickly, she filled her jug and wanted to go home. Then she heard a sob. It was really close. "Is somebody there?" she called. Suddenly, she saw a small figure on the ground. It was so small that Toinette had to kneel down to see it clearly. It had the shape of a small, strange man. He wore a bright green robe that looked like the wings of a beetle. In his hand, he had a hat with a long feather. Confused, she said to herself, "This is so funny." "This isn't funny at all," spoke the little man. "That's no way to speak to me, Toinette." Toinette looked surprised. "You know my name? That is so strange. What is going on? Why are you crying, little man?" "My name is Thistle, and I'm an elf," answered the man. "How would you like it if you were stuck to a big thorn? Look!" He turned around, and Toinette saw a big rose thorn in the back of his green robe. "That's it. I can get it out for you," she said. "Be careful," the elf cried. "Okay, I will be careful," said Toinette. And while she said that, she broke the thorn and gently removed it. The face of the elf lit up. "You are a good child," he said. "One day I might be able to help you in return." "I would have helped you sooner if I had seen you," said Toinette. "I was wearing my hat," said the elf. He put it on his head and disappeared. There was just a voice that said, "And then I'm invisible." "Whoa," sighed Toinette. "It would be so cool to be invisible." "I could give you my hat," said the elf. "But if you really like being invisible, I don't know. Sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it isn't. You can be invisible, but you will need the seeds of a fern. You have to put the seeds in your shoe. If you don't have the seeds, it's not possible to become invisible." "Where can I find these seeds?" asked Toinette. "I have no clue what they look like." "Of course not," said the elf. "Us elves take care of the seeds. Nobody can find it except for us. But since you were so nice to me, I shall give you a little bit. You can become invisible and see if you like it." "Awesome," said Toinette. "Can I have it now?" "What do you think?" said the elf. "You think I have my pockets stuffed with it? Of course not. Leave your bedroom window open tonight. I will come to you." He put his finger on his nose, jumped up like a grasshopper, tapped his head, and disappeared. Toinette hurried home. Her mother was already waiting for her. "Where were you?" she sighed. "I don't like it when you stay in the forest that long." The kids wanted to know why she stayed out so long, but Toinette snubbed them. The kids quietly left, as they often did when Toinette was around. "Story?" asked her baby sister Jeanette, but Toinette didn't feel like it. "No, not tonight," answered Toinette. "Ask someone else." It was bedtime, and Toinette opened her window and stayed awake until she fell asleep. Suddenly, she woke up, and on her blanket sat her elf friend. The elf asked, "Do you still want to be invisible?" "Yes, very much," answered Toinette. So the elf gave her a box with the fern seeds. He gave it to Toinette. "Put this in your shoe, and you will be invisible," he said. "And when you want to become visible again, take the seeds out of your shoes." Then Thistle left Toinette's bedroom. Immediately after, Toinette fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, she woke up feeling strange. Did this all really happen? She put on her beautiful Christmas clothes and shoes. She was ready for Christmas breakfast. Her mother was stirring the porridge on the stove. Toinette went to her, but she didn't move and didn't turn her head. "What's the time?" asked her mother. "Where's Toinette?" "Toinette isn't upstairs," said her sister Mary. "Her door is open, but she isn't there." "That's odd," said her mother. She went to the door and called, "Toinette! Toinette!" while Toinette was standing right there. "I'm invisible," giggled Toinette. "If she doesn't return, whatever," said her brother Pierre. "I want her room." "Maybe she was eaten by the big bad wolf," said brother Mark. The brothers started laughing, but Toinette didn't think it was funny at all. Did her brothers care so little about her? The morning passed, and her mother kept walking to the door in hopes of seeing Toinette return home. In the meantime, the children were playing happily together. They were used to playing without Toinette and didn't seem to miss her. It was Jeanette who once in a while said, "Poor Toinette, gone." "Who cares if she's gone?" said Mark. "If she would be here, it wouldn't be this much fun. All she does is whine and grumble. I'm fine with that she's not here. Life will be better." "Yeah, don't worry about Toinette," called Pierre. Toinette never before in her life had felt so unhappy and unseen as when she heard the children say that. It was never her intention to be mean to her brothers and sisters. She hoped that they still loved her. She snuck out of the house and sat down under a bush in the forest. She started crying and thought, "Jeanette missed me. Oh, and I pushed her away, and I didn't want to read her a story. For Mary, I've never had time, and I've never been nice to Mark and Pierre. Oh, boy." Then she heard an inner voice. "But you could be kinder and nicer if you tried, couldn't you?" And Toinette put her hands together and said out loud, "Yes, I could, and that's what I'm going to do." She untied her shoes and shook the seeds from her shoes. She put on her shoes and ran home. "Where have you been all day, Toinette?" asked her mother. Then she fell into her mother's arms crying and told her the whole story. Her mother listened to her. Then she felt Toinette's hands and head and she said, "You have a fever. I shall make you tea with honey." The next morning, Toinette did everything she could to be nice and kind to her brothers and sisters. She didn't always manage, but you can change completely from one day to another. Nevertheless, the kids noticed the change in Toinette and started loving her more each day. Another year passed until it was Christmas Eve again. Toinette was in a deep sleep when she was awoken by a loud bang on her window. It was Thistle visiting her. "Merry Christmas!" yelled the elf. "I've brought something for you." From his pouch he grabbed some seeds. "Oh no," she yelled. "I didn't like being invisible at all. The seeds scare me. I don't want them." "Don't be silly," said Thistle. His voice sounded kind and serious. "Last year it wasn't nice for you to be invisible, but take my advice and try again. You won't regret it, I promise." So Toinette put the seeds in her shoes. The next morning she went to the breakfast table without anyone seeing her. The little ones were sitting around the table with their eyes on the door, waiting for Toinette to surprise her. They all made a little surprise for her. "It's going to be fun to surprise her," said Mark. "I can't wait until she's here," said Marie. Everybody spoke kind words about Toinette, how beautiful and sweet she was, how nice it was to play with her. Toinette couldn't wait any longer. She ran upstairs to take off her shoes. Within minutes she was downstairs, this time visible. "Merry Christmas!" yelled the kids. She received the presents and was never before so happy. That night, Toinette kept her window open. Thistle came around midnight and brought his elf friends. "How was it?" asked Thistle. "Oh, this time it was great," said Toinette. "I want to thank you." "You can do me a favor," said Thistle. "We really enjoy the broth of fern seeds, but you have to make it on a real fire. We're too scared to get close to fire because of our wings. Could you make us some broth?" Thistle explained how to make it step by step, and dozens of elves enjoyed the broth in the kitchen. Then they said goodbye. The last thing Thistle told Toinette was, "Be happy, have a good mood, and be kind, because that's where you'll find true happiness." And those words Toinette remembered forever. She lived happily ever after. The Traveling Companion. When the father of Johannes passed away, the boy was terribly sad. He didn't have a mother, and now he was left all alone. That's why he decided to hit the road the day after his father's funeral. On his first night, he had to sleep outside in the hay, but Johannes didn't mind. The weather was nice and the moon was shining bright in the sky. That night, Johannes dreamt of a beautiful girl with a gold crown on her head. He also saw his father, who said to him, "Always live well, Johannes. Look what a beautiful bride you will have then." The next morning, Johannes woke up satisfied and intended to live his life good and kind. The next evening, the weather was terrible and Johannes couldn't sleep outside. He decided to take shelter in a small church. He sat down in a corner and fell asleep. Around midnight, he was awoken by voices. In the moonlight, he saw that there was a coffin in the middle of the church, but the man wasn't buried yet. Around the coffin were two bad men who wanted to hurt the man in the coffin. "Hey, what are you doing?" said Johannes bravely. "This man owes us money, but now he is dead and we get nothing, so as revenge we will throw him out of the church." "You can have my money," said Johannes. "It isn't much, but it is my entire inheritance. But you will have to leave the man alone." The two evil men laughed, took the money and walked away. When Johannes continued his travels the next morning, he heard a voice call out to him. "Hey friend, where are you going?" said the stranger. "I am going into the wide world," answered Johannes. "Me too," said the stranger. "Shall we go together?" Johannes thought it was a good idea, and soon they grew to be close friends. The traveling companion turned out to be an odd man. Not only did he know a lot about the world, he also had a magic ointment. With this ointment, he healed the broken leg of an old woman, and he made the puppets from a puppeteer come alive. In exchange for this, he got 3 brooms from the old woman and from the puppeteer a sword. The sword came in handy When they came across a dead swan, the traveling companion wanted to take the wings with him. Not much later, they arrived at a city where the king lived. They heard that the king was a kind man, but that his daughter was an evil princess. Every man who wanted to marry her had to solve 3 riddles. If they didn't manage, she would kill them. Many men had tried, but none had succeeded. The day after, Johannes saw the princess riding through the streets. She was so beautiful, and she looked just like the girl he had seen in his dreams. She couldn't be bad, could she? On the spot, he decided that he wanted to marry her, and even though everybody tried to change his mind, he wanted to try. While Johannes was sleeping, the traveling companion made a plan. He tied the wings of the swan to his back and took a broom from the old lady. Then he flew to the castle. Here he saw how the princess flew from her window with big black wings. The traveling companion made himself invisible and flew behind her while hitting her with his broom. When she arrived at a big mountain, she dove into a cave. An ugly troll was having a party there. The traveling companion heard the princess tell the troll that a new suitor had arrived to ask for her hand in marriage, and the troll answered that the suitor would have to guess what she was thinking of, and that she would have to think about her shoes. The next morning, the traveling companion told Johannes that he had dreamt of the princess and that she would be thinking about her shoes. Johannes believed him immediately. This had to be a sign. He went to the castle and answered without hesitation to the question of the princess. Oh, how surprised she was when he answered correctly. That evening, the traveling companion did the same thing, and this time he heard that the princess would be thinking about her glove. And again, Johannes was right the next day. That evening, the traveling companion returned to the castle again. He followed the princess, saw how she was dancing with the troll, and followed them when they flew back to the castle. The troll whispered, "Think about my head." And when the princess returned to her room, the traveling companion chopped the head of the ugly troll right off. He put it in a handkerchief and told Johannes the next morning that he had to open the parcel in front of the princess. Everybody was in shock when they saw the troll head, but Johannes had given the princess the right answer. That evening they got married. The princess was very unhappy, but luckily the traveling companion had told Johannes how to lift her spell. From that moment on, the princess loved Johannes very much. The day after the wedding, the traveling companion came to say goodbye. "I must go now," he said. "I have paid my debt to you. I am the dead man whose debt you paid to the bad man. Thank you so much." And with those words, he disappeared. And Johannes and his princess lived happily ever after. The Elephant and the Tailor. In your life, you've probably seen an elephant in the zoo, on television, or on the computer. An elephant is the biggest animal on land and lives in Southeast Asia or Africa. In Africa, it's a bit smaller and lives in the wild. In Southeast Asia, the elephant is domesticated and helps people with its wisdom, kindness, and strength. The elephant is a hardworking animal that obeys very well. If his sitter treats him right, he will be very grateful and will obey its sitter. He is tireless, diligent, and insanely strong. And the elephant understands everything. But the elephant can't handle injustice. When that happens, the elephant gets extremely angry. Listen to this story. In a certain city in Southeast Asia, An elephant was led through the streets to go drink by the river. He had the habit to stick its trunk through the open windows of the houses. Sometimes he would get a nice piece of bread or fruit from the people. He would pass by the tailor daily, but the tailor never gave him anything. One day, the elephant walked past the tailor again and stuck its trunk through the window. But the tailor, an angry man, pinched him with a needle and said, "Here's something for you." The elephant quickly retreated and calmly proceeded down the road. But the elephant was actually really angry and thought to himself, "You wait, I'm going to get you." When the elephant was done drinking at the river, he tossed his paws through the mud so the water got cloudy and he could fill his trunk with dirty water. At the tailor, he stuck his trunk through the window, and the tailor started to mock him. "You like the needle so much that you want more?" But just as the tailor stopped talking, the elephant shot the dirty water all over him and his employees. They tried to jump away, but were too late and got soaked. And all the expensive fabrics that were laying there were ruined by the dirty water. The evil tailor was laughed at by the whole town when they saw the damage. They said, "The tailor got what he deserved. He never should have harmed that sweet animal." From this story, we learn that you should treat everybody, but especially elephants, righteously. Let's listen to another story about the kindness of elephants. Once upon a time, an elephant got extremely angry because his sitter hit him. He became wild with rage, pulled himself loose, and stormed down the streets. Everybody ran from the elephant. The woman from the garden, who normally let her small child give the elephant a hand of grass, quickly walked away. But in her hurry, she forgot her child. The elephant was running straight towards the child. Everybody thought the child would be trampled, but something magical happened. The elephant recognized the child, picked it up with its trunk, and gently put the child on the roof of a market stall. The elephant calmed down and even let himself be led back by its sitter. Even though the sitter had treated the elephant terribly, the elephant forgave him, and the story goes that the sitter never hit the elephant ever again.